Stopped counting the days lost in the rhythm.
Global shares and the price of some key commodities have risen on hopes that the easing of China's strict zero-COVID measures would help to bring down inflation, even as some experts warned that the country was not prepared to live with the disease. China's government on Wednesday announced a significant shift towards living with the virus. People with COVID-19 who have mild or no symptoms can quarantine at home, while officials have been instructed to stop launching temporary lockdowns. Testing will no longer be required for cross-regional migrants. China's economic growth will keep picking up pace with the implementation of the newly announced anti-COVID adjustment measures, the premier, Li Keqiang, was quoted by state media as saying on Thursday. U.S.-listed shares of Chinese companies rose, while Hong Kong's Hang Seng Stock Market Index gained more than 3% on Thursday. The price of copper climbed on the promise of increased demand from China, its biggest consumer. Analysts hope that the easing of COVID measures will help restore global supply chains and, in turn, curb inflation. The realization that China is going to be back online and producing product will help bring down inflation, and that's a good thing. If inflation can come down, the Fed can step aside and pause, said Tim Grisky, chief investment strategist at Inverness Council in New York, referring to the U.S. Federal Reserve's recent run of interest rate hikes. In signs that global supply bottlenecks have already begun to ease, the cost of shipping fell dramatically over recent months. In January, the cost of sending a single container from China to the U.S. was $20,000. In December, that cost was around $2,000. The improvement in global supply chains was helped by a reduction in global demand. U.S. spending on manufactured goods fell over the last 3 quarters, according to the U.S. Commerce Department, likely due to the higher borrowing rates initiated by the U.S. Federal Reserve. U.S. inflation fell from a peak of 9.1% in June to 7.7% in October. As supply bottlenecks improve, the U.S. might be able to avoid a recession, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, said on Thursday. Worldwide reduction in demand for goods, coupled with China's strict COVID policies, had a severe effect on Chinese manufacturing in November. The value of the country's exports fell 8.7%, compared with the same time last year. Experts said restrictions, such as those which disrupted work at the world's biggest iPhone factory in Zhengzhou last month, were responsible for much of the decline in China's exports. China faces a very complex problem in adjusting its COVID policies, which have caused growth to slow, Yellen said. A positive change in China's COVID situation could lead to a pickup in growth, she added. The lifting of some COVID restrictions has revived demand for travel and some other services in China. Compared with other developed countries, medical resources in China are somewhat insufficient, said Nie Wen, a Shanghai-based economist at Wabao Trust, who has cut his China growth forecast for the first quarter of 2023 to 3.5 to 4%, from 5% previously. He cited a particular risk of COVID outbreaks when China celebrates the Lunar New Year holiday in January, a popular time for travel among the country's 1.4 billion people. Economists and analysts were confident that overall, the reopening was more positive for growth. Lockdowns mean people can't travel, people can't consume, can't work, said Rich Newsom, global chief investment strategist at Mercer. It's not humane to say it that way, but the GDP impact of lockdowns is a lot bigger than the GDP impact of letting the virus run. Some experts warned that reopening could bring about a surge in inflation, which could hit the global economy as well as China itself. The potential reopening could bring inflationary challenges to China, said Bruce Pang, chief economist at Jones Lang LaSalle. As cases rise, a surge in demand, especially the accelerating household consumption and short-term disruption to labor supply, production and supply chains, could drive inflation, Pang said.
DOJ asks judge to hold Trump in contempt over classified document subpoena, reports say. The Department of Justice has asked a federal judge to hold former President Donald Trump or his office in contempt of court over failing to comply with a subpoena that requires him to turn over all documents marked classified in his possession, two reports said Thursday. Prosecutors for the department last week told U.S. District Court Chief Judge Beryl Howell in Washington, D.C., that searches for such documents performed by Trump's team of 4 locations before Thanksgiving were not satisfactory, CNN reported. The Post reported that the DOJ wants Trump's office held in contempt, while CNN reported that the department wants Trump held in contempt. Both news outlets cited sources familiar with the matter and noted that the contempt action remains under seal. The subpoena for the classified documents was issued in May. The reports came a day after news broke that Trump's search team found at least 2 documents bearing classified markings at one of his storage units in West Palm Beach, Florida. The DOJ is conducting a criminal investigation of the former president for his refusal to return government documents that were removed from the White House before he left office, and shipped to his residence in his Mar-a-Lago club in Palm Beach. An FBI raid of Mar-a-Lago in August found thousands of government documents, more than 100 of which were marked classified or highly classified. Presidents are required by law to return government documents to the government when they leave office. Trump last month announced that he would seek the Republican Party's nomination for president in 2024.
UK announces major overhaul of its financial sector in attempt to spur growth. The UK government on Friday announced extensive reforms to financial regulation that it says will overhaul EU laws that choke off growth. The package of 30 measures includes a relaxation of the rule that requires banks to separate their retail operations from their investment arms. First introduced in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis. The government also confirmed it will review rules around the accountability of top finance executives, another post-2008 regulation. The senior managers regime, introduced in 2016, means individuals at regulated firms can face penalties for poor conduct, workplace culture or decision-making. Changes announced in the package, dubbed the Edinburgh Reforms, also include a review of rules on short selling, how companies list on the stock exchange, insurers' balance sheets and real estate investment trusts. Finance Minister Jeremy Hunt said he wanted to ensure the UK's status as one of the most open, dynamic and competitive financial services hubs in the world. The Edinburgh Reforms seize on our Brexit freedoms to deliver an agile and homegrown regulatory regime that works in the interest of British people and our businesses, he said in a statement. And we will go further, delivering reform of burdensome EU laws that choke off growth in other industries such as digital technology and life sciences. The government is billing the reforms as a way to capitalize on freedoms offered by Brexit, stating that hundreds of pages of EU laws governing financial services will be replaced or scrapped. Many argue that Britain leaving the EU has damaged the country's financial competitiveness, with Reuters reporting that London lost billions of euros in daily stock and derivatives trading to EU exchanges following its departure from the bloc. Researchers at the London School of Economics said earlier this year that financial services will be among the sectors worst hit by Brexit. Seeking to boost the UK's sluggish economic growth has also become a priority for the government, with the country forecast to be on the brink of a long recession. The previously announced removal of the UK cap on bankers' bonuses was one of the few policies announced by Hunt's predecessor, Kwasi Kwarteng, that remained after his chaotic mini-budget. Kwarteng had promised a Big Bang too, referring to the deregulation of the London Stock Exchange in the 1980s, which attracted a host of global banks and investment firms to the UK and rapidly increased the size of the City of London's financial sector. Another proposed reform would see regulators' remit increased to include facilitating the competitiveness of the UK economy, particularly the financial services sector. However, John Vickers, former chair of the Independent Commission on Banking, warned in a letter to the Financial Times this week that the special favoring of the financial services sector could be detrimental to it, as we all saw 15 years ago. Tulip Siddiq, the opposition Labour Party's shadow city minister, called the proposed reforms a race to the bottom. Introducing more risk and potentially more financial instability because you can't control your backbenchers is this Tory government all over, she said, referencing ongoing infighting within the ruling Conservative Party. Reforms such as ring fencing and the senior managers regime were introduced for good reason. The city doesn't want weak consolation prizes for being sold down the river in the Tories' Brexit deal, nor more empty promises on deregulation. Kay Swinburne, vice chair of KPMG UK's financial services practice, told CNBC in emailed comments that the reforms were a step closer to making regulation more efficient rather than a race to the bottom. While the majority of these reforms have been trailed before, they represent a step towards future-proofing the competitiveness and long-term growth of the UK's financial services industry while seeking to maintain standards.